Member for Burnaby Deer Lake.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. This is probably, or maybe, the last time I get up to give any kind of substantive speech in this chamber, and I'm certainly going to thank a few people, and it's a little bit bittersweet because it's been a great 8 years in many ways. I want to thank three people that have worked very closely with me over the last several years, and that is Kate Jones and Isaac Valet, who are my constituency assistants. Isaac for the last 3 years, and Kate pretty well since the beginning of when I was elected, and she's been a wonderful person and a wonderful friend, as well as an amazing constituency assistant with a lot of knowledge and history and compassion for the people, and she's for the people that we work for in the constituency. And I also want to thank Heidi Reid, who has been my assistant here in the legislature for several years. And I have to say what a wonderful staff we've had in the NDP caucus, from the researchers to the legislative assistants to the administrators. It's been a great experience, and I've been privileged to work with all of them. This building as well. You know, we spend so many hours down in the legislative dining room, and we have great staff down there who look after us and have become friends, and I'll miss all of them. And in this chamber as well, people who make sure that we have water all the time, and who've looked after and made sure I have the most comfort for my back in various situations. So it's been great working in this place as well. I'm going to spend a good part of this speech talking about my community. I love Burnaby. My husband Derek and I moved there. Oh, a little emotional. Derek and I moved there in 1977. When I just finished second year law school at UBC. Thank you to the member from the Kootenays for the Kleenex. He had just finished law school and was doing his articles with Burnaby Deer Lake resident Jim Lorimer, who had been a Minister of Transportation for the Dave Barrett government. And so there's a long connection with this place in our family. Burnaby has been our home ever since. It's been a great community to raise our four wonderful children, Sean, Darcy, Patrick, and Kelsey, who all now have wonderful partners as well, Leanne, Natalie, Kaylee, and Amin. And as I announced last week, we are now welcoming wonderful grandchildren into the mix. Okay, enough of the personal stuff. I can't take it anymore, and I'm sure you can't either. And my old friend from White Rock as well, who I've known a long time. Can you give me a hug? No, you can't take any time out of my half hour. I've already wasted about 5 minutes. You can give me a hug later, member. Hug later, and I'll tell them how great you are at making margaritas. Communities are rich and intricate tapestries, and I'm so proud of leaders in my community who recognize that there must be a balance, to have success. There must be balance in many different areas in order for a community to thrive. Those leaders include Burnaby City Council. I'm very proud of the work that Burnaby City Council has done, and my husband, who has served 30 years in public life, 15 as a city councillor and 15 as mayor. Something that the council and school board recognize as well, that in order to be successful, a community must have a balance of social, economic, and environmental strength, capacity, and resiliency. I'm very pleased that in my years on the school board, 9 wonderful years there as well, that the school board and the city worked closely and cooperatively on many projects, like the city funding field turf fields at city high schools, or that the City of Burnaby reserved land for schools, which was necessary since the BC government has refused to plan for schools in growth areas. I'm not just talking about balanced leadership in local government, but in leaders across all sectors, including, for example, the business community with the Burnaby Board of Trade, led by CEO Paul Holden. I want to recognize that in our community of Burnaby, and Mr. Speaker is also from Burnaby and has been my colleague the last 8 years as well, and I really appreciate that friendship. We're also so lucky to have so many nonprofit organizations that make our community a much better and more inclusive place to live. I know I can't talk about them all, but I'm going to mention a few. Organizations like Burnaby Neighborhood House, Kingsway Imperial Neighborhood Association, Burnaby Family Life, Burnaby Community Connections, the Burnaby Hospice Society, the Burnaby Association for Community Inclusion, a variety of seniors organizations like 55 Plus at Bonser, the Community-Centered College for the Retired, Burnaby Seniors Outreach Services Society, and multicultural organizations and societies like Success, Mosaic, and the Immigrant Services Society. So many of those organizations rely on volunteers, and our community would not be nearly successful, and I'm sure that's true of every community around this province, without volunteers enriching the fabric of our communities. The soccer coaches, the teachers who volunteer after school to coach teams, those volunteering for some Burnaby events like the Seniors Games, the World Junior Taekwondo Championships, volunteers helping seniors, helping families. These are all people who are willing to give to their community to provide opportunities and help that would not otherwise exist. The fabric of a community is strong if everyone works together and in the public interest. There can be differences of opinion as how to do things or what the priorities are, but everyone must believe that the public good and the public interest is paramount for communities to thrive. Which is why, Mr. Speaker, it has been so disappointing to have a provincial government over the last 8 years and before that neither respects nor works well with local governments and communities, and instead has been high-handed and autocratic rather than cooperative. There is nothing in this throne speech, Mr. Speaker, that causes me to believe that the BC Liberal government has any intention of working with communities, the engines of our economies, much of our economy. And there's nothing to make me believe that the paramount interest of this government is to work for the public good. I haven't seen that happen. Instead, we seem to have a BC Liberal government and leadership for whom it is all politics all the time. And that government loses credibility. I mean, I look at the statements, Mr. Speaker, in the throne speech, where one thing is said that is so many things are said that are so completely unrelated to the facts. I mean, here's an example. How about the claim, quote, that for the first time in 40 years, children born in 2021 will no longer be asked to pay for the burdens that our generation has placed upon them. Children born in 2021 will no longer be asked to pay for the burdens that our generation has placed upon them. Mr. Speaker, when this government took office in 2001, the provincial debt was about $34 billion. It is now almost $66 billion. It has doubled. The provincial debt has doubled over that time. And investment in infrastructure, investment in people in this province, I don't have a problem. But to suggest that the debt is going away, that we're going to have a debt-free BC, that LNG is going to be the savior and to slap it on the side of a bus, while at the very same time doubling the debt of this province is disingenuous And it makes this province, makes this government lose credibility. The interest costs in the year ended March 31st, 2016 the annual interest cost was $2.9 billion, or $245 million per month at an extremely low interest rate. So to suggest that somehow the group of people across the aisle from us are our economic saviors is simply ridiculous. And when you add on to that, what kind of alternate universe are the BC Liberals in? When you add on to that the contractual obligations that this government has piled up, future contractual commitments made over the next 30 or 40 years, mostly for privatized institution and infrastructure like hospitals and so on, where they have locked our children, talking about burden on our children, they have locked our children and sometimes our grandchildren into paying for contracts that have privatized our services, losing flexibility, paying for profits that go out the door or out of the country, and yes, burdening our children and grandchildren with billions of dollars of payments a year. The contractual obligations that this government undertook, the contractual obligations were $52 billion in 2009 and have now almost doubled to $100 billion. And of that $100 billion that we owe, $75 billion of that is owed from 2022 and beyond, which is pretty ironic, Mr. Speaker, because it rings a bell, because I believe that $100 billion is the amount that the BC Liberals promised we were going to see in LNG royalties just before the last election. $100 billion that we were going to see in royalties, as opposed to $100 billion that we have piled up in contractual obligations. So I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, but the credibility of this government, when it makes a throne speech, just isn't there as far as I'm concerned. In the category of broken promises, I want to spend some time talking about Burnaby Hospital, because the throne speech, Mr. Speaker, said that there's going to be an expansion. In fact, there was a global news story announcing several $100 million, which turned out to be completely inaccurate. That's what it would cost if it ever were going to happen, but Mr. Speaker, it never will under this government. I want to talk, because this may be my last chance, I want to put the recent history of Burnaby Hospital on record. And I want to show, and the reason I want to do that is that I want to demonstrate why I do not believe that Burnaby Hospital will ever get built under this government, despite promises, because there have been repeated promises to build Burnaby Hospital, and they all come right before an election, and then nothing happens. Burnaby Hospital, where my children were born, where my parents died, where my new twin grandsons were born 3 months ago, and looked after, by the way, by the very professional staff in the neonatal intensive care unit for a few weeks. Burnaby Hospital has served our community for decades. Dedicated staff and volunteers have made it special, but the hospital has been neglected and is in desperate physical condition. Shortly after the Liberals, this Liberal government was elected in 2001, a government report was completed called a master plan for Burnaby Hospital that recommended and said there desperately needed to be a rebuild of most of the hospital because of its age. The two oldest buildings date back to 1952 and in the 1960s, and only the third tower, the 1970s tower, is okay. And because of seismic deficiency, in fact, basically they said that the oldest wing would fall down in any kind of earthquake at all. That report from 2001 was shelved and ignored. Conditions for the patients in Burnaby Hospital are poor. In 2012, frustrated medical department heads wrote a letter to the CEO of Fraser Health that warned of a, quote, significant, serious, and sustained problem, end of quote, with C. difficile, including 84 patient deaths. And Mr. Speaker, I haven't talked about this publicly, but my mother was one of the people that died in that time period with C. difficile, from C. difficile at Burnaby Hospital. The doctors pointed directly to the aged hospital infrastructure, and that is a quote, as a major cause of those deaths. When then Minister, the now Minister of Finance and then the Minister of Health, announced a citizen consultation committee to be headed up by 2 Liberal MLAs, one the present MLA from Burnaby North and Harry Bloy, with citizen co-chair Pam Gardner, I and others expressed deep concerns that its formation was politically motivated and that it might not act impartially. Our concerns were well-founded. Leaked documents made it clear the consultation committee was part of a BC Liberal Party strategy to win seats in Burnaby. So you can understand, Mr. Speaker, why a promise in yet another throne speech is met with some skepticism by residents of Burnaby. A December 2011 3-page document outlines how the Liberals plan to use Burnaby Hospital as, quote, the issue we can win Burnaby Deer Lake on, re-win Burnaby North and Lougheed, end of quote. The document says, quote, only Burnaby Hospital can deliver a new seat, Burnaby Deer Lake, taking out the member from Burnaby Deer Lake, since I'm not allowed to say my name, and helping us keep 2 tight swings, Burnaby North and Burnaby Lougheed, end of quote. The document was written by Pam Gardner, the same person who was appointed to the supposedly impartial citizen committee, a Liberal insider and who was a Liberal insider, and Liberal operatives Brian Bonney, and some people will be familiar with that name in this chamber, and Mark Robertson. This letter was sent to government, apparently approved because it was then put into motion. It outlines a plan for Mr. Speaker, for the Premier, the Minister of Finance, and the member from Burnaby North to tour the hospital, followed by the launch of a committee chaired by Gardner, including the Liberal MLAs from Burnaby North and Lougheed, and a doctor who was described to be on side with the Liberal plan. After the tour, the document said they would hold a press conference, quote, to announce that PCC, the Premier, will rebuild Burnaby Hospital or look into what the community wants. This would, this is a quote again, keep the issues are without committing dollars and buy us time to do some polling and confirm this is a winning issue. End of quote. The committee would serve another purpose as well. Quote, once more, if we can introduce a second-generation Chinese doctor candidate for Burnaby Deer Lake to champion this issue, it would help seal the deal, end of quote. One of the suggested candidates, I won't say his name, was appointed to the committee, but he didn't end up actually being the candidate doctor, but Dr. Gu did. The document repeatedly reinforces that the objective of the plan is for political gain rather than addressing the healthcare needs of the community. A series of leaked emails from September 2012 indicate that political manipulation continued on in the operations of the committee. For example, Pam Gardner promised that the report writer, a past president of the Liberal Party of BC, would divert blame for the neglect of the hospital from the Liberal government to the Fraser Health Authority. The report was published in November of 2012, about 6 months before the election. It had some good information and recommendations in it, but unfortunately the whole thing was so politically tainted that the report's credibility was entirely undermined. As an aside, the city had called for a new hospital to be built on the Wellington lands owned by the province, but instead, those lands were sold to a private developer. March 2013, another high-level master plan was completed, and the Liberal 2013 election platform said Burnaby Hospital is underway or in progress. It has never been included in post-election service or fiscal plans. There is no money for Burnaby Hospital. So let's hop forward a little bit. What's happening in the run-up to this election? In May 2016, a Global Story reported that the government of BC and Fraser Health Authority have announced a major expansion and upgrades to Burnaby Hospital to the tune of $622 million. All there is a concept plan. There is nothing. There is no money. There is no capital plan. There is no business case. There is nothing. It was an entirely political announcement. This government has used Burnaby Hospital as a political football for years, and in the end, they've done nothing about rebuilding the hospital or building a new hospital. So Burnaby Hospital was cited as a future project in last week's throne speech. So, Madam Speaker, every 4 years before an election, the BC Liberals make promises or pull political stunts around Burnaby Hospital because they think it's going to win them seats. But for 16 years, nothing has happened, and people have died as a result. I don't believe there's any intention to rebuild our hospital now. And the people of the third largest city in this province deserve a new hospital. I mentioned Brian Bonney. It was part of the, he's a Burnaby resident, or he was. He has had a long but not very illustrious career in our community. He was rewarded with a job within the Liberals. And currently, unfortunately, though, as a result of that, he is waiting trial, charged with criminal breach of trust in connection with his work in 2011 and 12 as a senior staffer for government outreach to the multicultural community. And I did say awaiting trial. The trial, I understand, will take place well after the BC election. What a surprise. Makes you wonder how many other Liberal political operatives have been placed in the BC civil service over the years. Well, of course, there was George Gredas, who broke the law in getting rid of FOI emails and then lied under oath about it. But you know, the worst thing, Mr. Speaker, and why I'm talking about this lack of credibility and why I talk about my concerns about Burnaby Hospital and broken promises and more and more broken promises, is an article that Vaughn Palmer wrote on that. He says, I believe it was Vaughn Palmer, I hope I've got it right, quote, "But a long line of critics, most notably BC's Freedom of Information Commissioner, say the real problem is a pervasive culture of avoiding transparency within the government's political arm, a lack of ethical leadership by the Premier, and a small army of mostly young political loyalists whose futures are tied to the success of the party, and despite working in taxpayer-paid positions, consider it their top job to protect their ministers." These are not people that are working in the public interest. I won't even go into Laura Miller, BC Liberal campaign director, waiting for trial. How can people of this province trust this government and believe what they have to say and what they promise in the throne speech and what they are going to promise in the budget tomorrow with a history like that? The deputy premier said about Laura Miller, who's waiting for trial after being charged in Ontario with breach of trust and 2 other criminal code offenses over the alleged destruction of documents in 2013. Guess I am going to talk about her. Deputy Premier said, "This is a pretty old case. This is not really our issue. Having a campaign director with 3 pending criminal charges is not an issue?" I guess it isn't for this government. Recently, very recently, speaking again of apparent government lack of concern for the appearance, if not the substance, of conflict, malfeasance, a recent New York Times article dubbed British Columbia, quote, "the Wild West of Canadian political cash," pointing out that the Premier got a stipend that has amounted to $300,000 for raking in tens of millions of dollars from corporations and rich donors. As the article put it, quote, personal enrichment from the handouts of wealthy donors, some who have paid tens of thousands of dollars to meet with her at private party fundraisers. She was embarrassed into ending the stipend. But the article says, what it says is money talks and votes don't. This is my overall conclusion, is that this is a government that repeatedly made decisions not based on what was in the public interest, but what was in their political interest. As George Gredis, the person who was charged and convicted, said, we will do whatever it takes to win. The same deputy premier who thinks it's fine to hire a campaign director with 3 pending criminal charges said that the New York Times article is, quote, laughable. The BC Liberals are laughing. They are laughing at the people of BC. They are laughing at you and I because they don't care what they think, no matter what they say 3 months before an election. They don't care. It's a government devoid of embarrassment or concern for the people of this province. Mr. Speaker, that may sound naive and idealistic to members on the other side of the House, but I believe that without ethics and integrity, you have nothing. You have nothing. Mr. Speaker, I believe I just have a few minutes left, and I want to talk about just a couple of other things. As I've said, I was a school trustee for 9 years in Burnaby and really enjoyed that. And I was very privileged to have been named the post-secondary spokesperson for the BC NDP for the official opposition for the last few years. And to be able to speak up on education in both of those capacities has been a real privilege. Because I do believe that education is truly the great equalizer. But not only that, it's the surest route to economic prosperity for a province. And that every child, rich or poor, deserves a good education. And we know that public schools and universities and colleges are one of the best investments governments can make. Strong public education ensures that students from every background has the opportunity to succeed. It is truly the great leveler. And so again, it is disappointing to me that we have underfunded and undervalued education in this province. We have fallen, as others have said, from the second highest investor in education to the second lowest. And at the universities, we have provided and funded less and less of the university system and asked students to pay for more and more, particularly international students. We have the highest interest rates in the country on student loans. We have the highest student debt. We have gotten rid of free adult basic education. So, Mr. Speaker, I see that my time is almost up. It has been one of my greatest disappointments that we do not fund education. It has been a great disappointment that nothing has happened on Burnaby Hospital. And so there has been many good things, but there have been many disappointments as well. I want to just tip my hat as well to the labor unions of this province who stand up for people, not only for their members, for fair working conditions and wages, but they also stand up for everybody else in this province to make sure that there is fairness and equality. And I finally want to thank, and I'm going to get choked up again, but I've only got a minute, so I can't. I want to thank the women of the Women's Caucus, BC NDP Women's Caucus. They have been the most wonderful friendships, and they are the most strong, which I'm not being right now, but they are such a strong and wonderful group of women who consistently stand up for the women of this province, and I want to thank them for that. Thank you.